All right. Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm taking the complexity out of Hadoop and big data. I appreciate everyone taking time in your day to check this out. Joined here by Nik Rouda, a senior analyst at ESG here, and he was led into the authoring on the white paper, which many of you have downloaded. If you haven't, you can go to odpi.org and grab that here after the call. But thank you, Nik, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm very excited to be here. This is going to be a great event and looking forward.
So definitely.
The premise here is we really wanted to understand what's happening in the Hadoop environment. And if you're not familiar with ESG, the reason we do that is because we are an independent analyst firm. We are IT industry analysts, not in the sense of business analysts, but looking at who are the major providers out there and what are they doing. It's an organization that's been around 16 plus years, covers a wide range of technology areas, but I happen to look at the data and analytics space. So ODPi is something I've been tracking really since its inception, and we wanted to understand what impact it's having on the market. And that's really the point of today's webinar, to talk about it from a independent point of view. Now, obviously, if you've joined this call, you know big data is a thing, and there's a lot of big strategies. We find, no surprise, 80% of organizations say big data is a top 5 priority for the business. Many of them say it's the #1 priority. But slightly disconnected from that, about 60% of organizations say it's a top 5 priority for IT. So there's a subtle distinction there. How important is it for the business? How important is it for the IT department and organization? There's a little bit of a mismatch there, which means organizations are sometimes getting out ahead of their own IT department in their interest here and trying to figure out how do they make this a reality when IT has quite a few other things on their plate. They need to keep all the existing enterprise systems running. They have budgets to work to. They have a variety of requests for their time. So there's really a challenge for many organizations in building on big data without putting too much demands and stress on the existing IT department. And that way you can bridge this gap a little bit. And I think that's something we've seen true across many different organizations, as shown here.
Nik, that's kind of an interesting stat there. And I sort of wonder, in your opinion there, you know, this is probably also a trend that happened back in the SaaS, you know, when SaaS was starting to come alive here about 10 or 15 years ago. But I sort of wonder with big data, you know, where SaaS, you could completely end around the IT department for your purchase. Big data doesn't seem like you can do that as much. You really have to have a dependency on IT. I'm just curious if you see, is there a difference from the trend that we might have had 10 or 15 years ago as enterprises were going, you know, for software as a service-based applications and doing that versus what they're doing in the big data and Hadoop area?
Well, it's an interesting parallel, and obviously there's actually an intersection of these two trends as well, where big data can be done in the clouds. The challenge is that big data for many organizations is not as simple as a ready-to-go user application. It involves building an entire environment and ecosystem and patching together many different components, and that makes it harder for a business individual to run off on their own versus just using a SaaS-based CRM application, for example. So I think the complexity of the environment makes this a little bit different, although, again, there's an intersection point where cloud does help make big data easier as well by taking away a lot of the infrastructure challenge.
Yeah, I'd agree. That'd be something interesting to, I know you have some slides on that later. It'd be interesting to learn about that a bit more.
Yeah, of course. So if we think about Hadoop, Hadoop started out really as a graduate student project. And I know this because I was friends with a fellow named Mike Caffarella back when we were undergraduates. And I ran into him at a Hadoop Summit conference a couple of years ago and said, "So what are you up to, Mike?" I was just surprised to see him there. And he talked about how he had accidentally created an entire industry within IT. And quite entertaining to see that come along and how it's changed and grown. Clearly, the open source community has really embraced Hadoop, and there's been a whole ecosystem of projects. I don't know if there's an exact count, but 36 or more different things directly related to Hadoop that are now open source software initiatives. there's been quite a few startups as well. Companies going, wait, there's opportunity here. I want to take this and commercialize it. I want to build products on it. I want to build my technology around it and either build a big data project, product, service, or build something that leverages big data to make it better. And so quite a few different organizations have gone ahead, gotten funding, really kind of shaped their whole mission and vision around the Hadoop area. And we've come a ways since then, because now it's been more than 10 years that Hadoop has really existed as a distributed platform for analytics. So a lot of growth and progress from what was maybe kind of modest beginnings and a humble start. It's really become really an entire sector within IT. Now, as far as how far people are along with Hadoop, those of you who go to events like Strata or Hadoop Summit or Spark Summit, those who live in Silicon Valley, build their business around big data, may assume that Hadoop is now ubiquitous, that it's pervasive across all organizations. But in fact, you're really probably part of that early majority or early adopters. Only about 20% today say that they're already using Hadoop in the enterprise in production, but 37% say they're very interested. So that next wave is really coming online now. And I think that's important for people to realize that this is early days. Just like database and data warehouse have evolved over decades, Hadoop's just finished its first decade and is really kind of moving from precocious teen into full adulthood as it takes its place out there for many organizations. So if you're still trying to figure out what your approach to Hadoop should be, if you're still trying to figure out, have we missed the boat? Are we too late? The competitors got to jump on me. The reality is there's still a lot of opportunity to get engaged here, to get involved, figure out what it can do for you and your business and how to build around it.
So a question for you, Nick, on here. This is always a slide and a statistic that sticks out to me, is that, you know, as a technology that's 10 years old, it's really only 20% production penetrated. You know, in terms of organizations there, but there's that big circle outside there on the very somewhat, you know, the very interested, somewhat interested, and I'd imagine those are folks, you know, and I'd be curious in your research there, those are folks that might have skunkworks projects around Hadoop and things like that, I would assume, right?
Yeah, these are people that are actively evaluating, they're trying to figure out where it would fit within their organization, they're doing pilots, POCs, they may be doing test and dev and prototyping, all those types of early stage activities. Some are looking at alternatives as well, trying to see how does Hadoop fit against data warehouse, trying to see how does Hadoop fit against Spark, which in my view is much more complementary than an alternative. One tends to build on the other. But to see this, I mean, really shows that there's still a lot to come in this industry, in this space, and the adoption. I mean, this is actually quite remarkable for 10 years on to see it come. It's been something that's been kind of a slow building wave, but I think, you know, when we look at this slide a year or 2 years from now, you know, probably almost everything will incorporate Hadoop at some point.
I would agree. I mean, I think, you know, to me, this big data Hadoop technology is probably one of the greatest assets of technology that maybe has came along. I mean, I'd hate to say it's came along computing at all time, but it's certainly from a transformational aspect of how an organization can execute, how an organization can develop better insights. It's bar none, right? I mean, it's really set an interesting bar. And one of the things I always kind of throw out there is, okay, you know, we're 10 years in. Are we behind the curve? Are we ahead of the curve? And you know, I'd love to get your take on that. But I'd also love for folks in the audience here. I'd love to see where you guys fit into this realm here. You know, if you want, tweet at us a little bit at ODPi.org on Twitter. Let us know where you fit in on this, because I'm always interested of our audience here that's coming and hearing this message. You know, are you stuck in that green and yellow section and you're kind of figuring out how do I get to that blue, or what's my adjustment to that blue? That's always sort of a fascinating thing of what's holding people in that sort of holding pattern in there and keeping you back from moving forward.
John's trying to say, if you're still undecided at this point, what's it going to take to convince you? But no, I think a lot of people are really actively moving forward and just been waiting to let the technology mature a little bit, make it stable. And that's really some of what we're talking about today. That theme has been really important. Many people are happy to be way out front of the curve. Others want it to be rock solid before they bet their career or bet their business on it.
Yep, I would agree. I would agree.
So interestingly, there's not just businesses involved here. We see a lot of government utilization of Hadoop. We see a lot of academics using Hadoop to do science, building new technologies around Hadoop, and participating in different ways. Each of these different groups has a lens on what Hadoop means to them and what it could do for them. And their specific goals vary a little bit. And interestingly, given that Hadoop really is open source and community driven, it's rallying these different goals that's going to shape where does Hadoop go from here. And it's not going to be a hard turn direction. It's going to be a continuous evolution, and like evolution, you know, fits and starts in different places, and then things rallying together around a common cause. And I think that is one of the really fun parts about the open source community in general, but this one in particular is that it's so diverse in its stakeholder groups. And again, each one can try to exploit Hadoop in a good sense in their own particular objectives. And taking that a step further, I mean, there's kind of different strategies in terms of how you want to work with Hadoop. Some people want to develop against it, and this can be independent developers in the community saying, hey, I see an interesting problem here that's not solved. Vendors tying into that. We see people wanting to just leverage it, saying, look, I'm not interested in building the core of Hadoop. I really want to utilize it. I want to use it to make my product better or my knowledge better, serve my own product development. And then not least being able to facilitate how does Hadoop grow. And here you see, again, commercial interests, vendors, resellers, service providers, systems integrators, people that can really act as third-party experts and provide some of that knowledge. And I think that's really important, is given that Hadoop is still a fairly young technology in the scheme of things, and one that's rapidly changing, having people that make it easier to adopt, consume, run with, support, that's a really important function. I've been waiting a while for those last couple of categories, service providers and systems integrators, to really get going. I feel like sometimes they wait till the market's fully baked and then try and drive the margin out of it, when here there's a really interesting opportunity to help build that market. But what's interesting to me as well is if you think of these different communities, these different strategies, we can get something that's very fragmented. If they're all working at cross purposes, if they're all trying to compete with one another, that can lead to a lot of market confusion, and that's certainly been the case. We've seen some of that start to shake out, but really the best result's going to come the more collaboration we have. Then we'll have a tighter strategy. It will continue to accelerate in its capabilities, in its robustness, in its adoption. And I think I would like to see these different groups and these different strategies continue to have more overlap. But again, given the varying goals, the very nature of who people are, sometimes their interests align, sometimes they're neutral to one another, sometimes they're in direct conflict. And this is important that we start to solve this as an industry and figure out how do we take this technology and really make something of it, just as Linux, for example, has grown out there.
Yeah, and Nick, I loved your insight into the service provider, reseller, and integrators area. I could not agree more. You know, they're the people that sort of are the trusted advisors of organizations and have to help make sense of the technology. And frankly, and I love your take on this. You know, the collaboration competition. I have my own feeling where that sits, but I kind of wonder where you sit. You know, if you're a service provider, what is the higher asset there? Is it that competition, or actually getting more collaboration, more standards to help these technologies get more pervasive?
Well, I think you want both. I mean, innovation is driven a lot of times by people competing, but making something enterprise grade often comes from standards and having it be well understood and adapted and not too much variance. So there's a healthy tension there in the market right now, and I think that tension is actually a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously ODPi, we're in a position we love collaboration, we love standards, we come from an open source basis, but you know, people bringing products to market that help drive these technologies forward are key, right? They get the attention in the space, they're starting to solve problems, and they get out of that complacency area that standards can sometimes lead you into. So you're right, it's a great healthy tension that helps drive this forward.
Yeah, the confusion comment really has to do with somebody who's trying to build an application on Hadoop or choose a platform for Hadoop that their business will standardize on as an organization. And there it's really picking, okay, which of these horses do I want to bet on? Which of these tools do I need to pull together? And given how fast things continue to move here and how many parts there are of the complete technology stack, I think the more you can do to provide a little bit more confidence, there, a little bit of confusion is okay. Too much leads to inertia. And so how do we get some momentum actually going here?
Yep. No, that's a great way to think about it. And it's also tough because I mean I go back to that slide you had earlier there on that, again, that green and orange gap in there of people that are just kind of spitting the tires on this. You know, I wonder how much that confusion piece there actually is keeping more people spinning there as they're trying to wrap their heads around, okay, what's my differentiator? You know, I'm having to make a vendor choice up front, and that vendor choice dictates everything I do from here. And if I don't like my vendor choice, how do I unwed from? I mean, that there is an insight. You know, I've talked with a ton of end users, and I know you have too, Nick, but I've talked with a ton of end users in this space, and that ends up being the piece that always sort of comes back to haunt them. You know, they made a decision up front, and now they're sort of stuck in, do I trust my product? Do I trust the product vision of the platform vendor that I wedded myself to, or I don't? And if I don't, boy, that's an expensive proposition to get out of.
Well, I don't have the stat right here, but interestingly, we find roughly a third of people going purely open source in their adoption of Hadoop, saying, look, I really want to make sure I stay true to the greater common approach. We see about a third of people going purely commercial, saying, I want to pick a vendor in the distribution. I need that support. I'm willing to align. But the biggest chunk is slightly larger than each of those. And if I said a third and a third, that probably doesn't add up to more. But slightly larger group, we see actually combining and mixing and matching open source and commercial technologies together in this area. And I really think that group is going to continue to grow the fastest as people are trying to have confidence, have support, have extra innovation that comes from focused vendors, but also be able to know that they can fall back, that they can take the technology themselves and develop and support it if they need to down the road. And that dual strategy is becoming increasingly common.
Oh yeah, it's total the shift from I buy product to I buy platform. You know, that's how I see it. It's phenomenal, but I think organizations are realizing that's the way I compete, right? I mean, if I buy product, I'm going to be as strong in my way of how I engage the customer, how I see insights within my business, as my competitors are. But the ones that are actually saying, I want platform and I want to do something differentiated and unique, those are the ones that are able to set that aside. They're the ones that are able to step ahead and do something unique that their competitors can't do.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think what people should be asking themselves, if you're a Hadoop stakeholder, is how do you turn this technology into something meaningful for your business? How do you make it something that's going to have an impact? And a more direct way, let's say, is how hard is it to build an application around Hadoop, something that ties into your customers or your colleagues and makes it useful to them? And the secondary question to that is, how portable is that application? So if I build in one environment, am I going to be able to move it to others? And back to what we were saying around cloud, some people may well want to build on premise and scale in the cloud, or vice versa, use the cloud to flexibly get an environment and develop there, but then when it's ready, run it in their own data center. But either direction, you know, the third question always comes back to, how hard is this going to be to support? I don't necessarily mean just in the sense of, am I paying a support license fee and have somebody I can call up, but the broader sense, like, what's the total cost of ownership of this going to be as I continue to try and build out additional value above and beyond the Hadoop platform, because the Hadoop is a means to an end. And if you can't answer these questions, then you probably need to do a little bit more thinking about what approach is going to be most effective for you and your organization. You need to be really realistic as well about your capabilities. If you have no data scientists and no likelihood of hiring them based on who you are, what you can afford, then that's something to think about. If you're a large organization and is investing hundreds of people here, maybe you're more confident in building more and developing more. But it's not just data scientists, it's app developers and others as well that get engaged here. And thinking again about total organization strengths and weaknesses, what approach is going to make this easiest and fastest for you to get something out to market and continue to run with it in the future.
Yeah, and the data science angle, I think is interesting, because I don't know if you've seen this trend, but there are data scientists that live within the line of business outside of IT. That tends to be a trend that I've seen with a few. I was talking with a few members of the ODPi user advisory board last week, and that was a trend that they're confronting, and it's good that the big data stuff that's permutating within the line of business. But the challenge is these folks are coming back to IT armed with executive sponsorship, saying, hey, look, I need this in my Hadoop environment. I need these tools, I need these tools. And IT's sort of stuck, maybe not necessarily hard of answering question 1, but 2 and 3, they're having to spin up parallel clusters. They're having to bring out projects that they just don't have any, and maybe there isn't a direct way that their vendors can support. Maybe they're kind of out on their own, and they're having to make sort of those difficult decisions there and build up environments that, challenge the support, and then challenge of, hey, if you actually want to take this to production, what does that even look like? And will the tools I'm having here in these open source projects be supported? That I think is something, at least for some of the folks that I've been talking to, it weighs very heavy on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that, you need to know what your answers will be to these questions before you can move forward.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So there's another organization here, you know it better than I do, but to introduce it to our audience, ODPi really evolved in the recent times to join the Hadoop ecosystem. And the goal of it really is reconciling these different stakeholders and their interests, trying to get more from confusion to cohesion, to trying to build up code quality, making common core for everybody to build off. And I don't mean common core in the education sense that frustrates parents doing math homework. I mean having a similar foundation we're all working from. Continuing to stimulate innovation. So again, does not mean not having innovation, but working the balance there and getting a working framework for businesses to have somewhere to go where they can collaborate directly. And this is not to replace the technical goals of Apache Software Foundation. Obviously that organization works well and contributes to manage where the code lives, but there's another question of how the businesses work together around this and what results they can have together. So I think ODPi has really taken a key role here in providing a little bit of leadership, aside from what do we develop here, to how do we manage this industry together. And again, what that brings then is more confidence. Is Hadoop going to be a safe choice of data platform? Is it going to simplify building applications and testing applications for people trying to build software in Hadoop environments? Is it going to help that coordination between vendors and help build products that not Hadoop distribution vendors show me compatibility matrices and saying, look, this version of each Hadoop project works with these other versions of Hadoop projects. And on one hand, I want to really applaud them. I think it's fabulous that they're taking the initiative to test 30-some projects together with different versions being released monthly for many of them. On the other hand, I kind of want to slap them that that's even necessary, that people are so frustrated trying to figure out what works together that you need to have somebody do that effort. It should all just click together seamlessly, and I think that's the challenge. And I think if ODPi can hit these goals, simplified building of applications and more coordination, then it's definitely a worthy part of the community here.
Yep, I would agree. I mean, it's a lot of commodity work that's being done in triplicate or more, which you could argue, hey, if you could take that effort and apply it to solving more direct end customer issues, helping really be innovative on top of the stack, it gets us out of the way of trying to perfect the table stakes and instead do something really innovative.
Absolutely. So, John, do you want to speak to what ODPi has seen in terms of ecosystem approach around the Hadoop stack and start to introduce some of the different components here and how they work together?
Yeah, and this is sort of an interesting chart here of if you look 10 years ago, the whole concept of Hadoop was, how can I process non-structured data in a more efficient manner? Bar none. And you have MapReduce, which comes from the realms of the Googles and the Yahoos of the world here, and a storage engine due to the back end. But this is really the crux of it. Structured data, the standard relational database management system, it didn't cut it. You had to spend so much time of just spinning your wheels there to get this unstructured data into something structured. It was a tough effort here. MapReduce HDFS changes that. But what's interesting is then over time, this concept of let's take data in the form that it is most native and process and get the insights we need from it. That's a change strategy. And I did a lot of database stuff, 10, 15 years ago. And the strategy was before you get it into a structure and then you deal with it. Now it's, let me deal with it and take what I need and then make insights, right? It's a whole different way of processing it. But now that's also changed of, okay, how are we just dealing with data in general, right? And from just a, MapReduce HDFS combo, now it's questions up and down the stack. Now all of a sudden, as opposed to MapReduce dealing with your management, your access, and your processing, now you have specialized tools that can handle that from different sorts of flows there, right? Machine learning, interactive SQL, streaming, all of those things of how is the best way to manage the data depending upon what the nature of the data is, emerged, right? It's almost like a light bulb went off. But then when you have that, then you have this sort of next level that pops on top of here. Monitoring, security, things like that. The natural sort of enterprisey things that, which is interesting. It's almost this kind of bolt-ons to Hadoop, right? They were never really designed, Hadoop was really never designed in a sense to take those enterprise grady features in. This was something that has had to come after the fact. And a number of the Hadoop vendors have done a great job of solving that problem. But that's actually one of the interesting challenges that we're seeing as this stack grows and continues to grow. We're solving great point problems within here, but what's the strategy of how this all comes together? And Nick, this would be something I'd love to get you sort of your insight on as well. As customers are looking here, as they transition their thoughts of Hadoop from being just a point of how do I process, complex sets of unstructured data to a full data strategy. Are these the sort of same thing? Or what are they thinking about? Are these the sort of same things that keep popping up? How am I handling management? What are my access strategies? How do I even think about this tool? I'd love your insight there.
No, I think this is important, and this really shows not only how much bigger has it gotten, but what are the different layers and functions here. And I think the risk today in the market is Hadoop gets devolved to being just the storage layer. And I don't think that's where people want it to end up. I think
I'd agree.
The way it can handle distributed data processing and some of the things you're building on these higher layers above it is where the power really comes through for businesses. And the focus here has continued to change and evolve. Some people are saying, I want this to be a data warehouse or BI-like tool, so I really want SQL capabilities. Others have said, no, I want real-time analytics, and I want to support IoT environments, or I want to support instant shopping advisories or other types of things, and streaming data analytics is coming in. Machine learning seems to be poised to be the next big layer, saying, hey, wait, we finally have enough data to manage machine learning at scale. Let's go do it. It's not that the math there is new, it's just that it wasn't economically feasible to do it. Now we can, building on top of Hadoop. And to your point, that data management layer at the top is really critical for enterprise acceptance. But if you don't have that, everything else is just neato technology, but it's really hard for a business to run with it. And if you bring in those layers, that's where the data lake becomes acceptable. That's where this stuff can really underpin a true enterprise and meet its standards and requirements for applications. So building up this stack is really important, and making sure that each one of these layers works, again, smoothly as you swap in different pieces. Each one of these boxes is kind of a concept. There's lots of different products and projects that could be in place there, but how do you make them all work together seamlessly? That's really the challenge here.
That is exactly it. That's exactly it, and that's where a lot of ODPi is positioned to help make this easier and help make it so you're not stuck. You know, you don't pick a vendor and then that's everything you play in. Now you can open your eyes to the broader view and say, hey, what's best for my organization? What's the most tactical things? What investments have I already made that I can just take advantage of that are already just sitting there? Yeah. That's all of a sudden when these things, and then you get very unique offerings and you get back to that platform versus product.
Yeah, and I think the next slide illustrates this as well.
Exactly, yeah.
If we look here, you can think originally HDFS and MapReduce, Yarn coming in a few years ago as a better resource scheduler manager for it. Then just below that, you see, obviously, people have built whole distributions and platforms. They've taken those core components and they've added other pieces to it. They've supported it. They've innovated it. Oftentimes, they've given everything back straight to the open community. Sometimes they've held it closed and said, no, this is how we want to make our money. We're a software company, not a support professional services organization. But what the whole ecosystem looks like, and literally hundreds of companies touching on this in one way or another, either leveraging the platform, 1,000 partners in this space, and they mean some reseller partners, but they also mean a lot of technology alliance partners. And for that stuff to, again, have the confidence, have the grease, if you will, that everything works together smoothly, and we don't have a lot of difficulty over version X.X of something not being compatible with something else. That's what is necessary for this ecosystem to work. And I'm not saying there won't be consolidation within here. Some of these companies will make it, some won't. Some will be snapped up. There's cool technologies that can fit into a bigger platform. But the fact that there's so many getting funded, so many starting up and growing in this space, shows both the opportunity and the risk at the same time, if there isn't some central steering and guidance to make these things work together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the best word you said in there is confidence, right? I mean, I think still, you know, if I go back and look at those folks that are still sitting in that, I'm trying this out, I'm kicking the wheels, that confidence isn't there. You know, maybe there's more to it, but certainly I think confidence ends up being a huge question in there. And just so many different approaches, so many different thoughts, and folks that are sort of caught in the technology, but in the end of the day, they're thinking, what's the outcome for my business here? You know, how do I get from a technology investment, a platform investment, to an insightful business outcome, a positive business outcome, a you know, higher revenue opportunity business outcome? That's sort of the questions that I think are sticking in a number of minds, probably CDOs, CIOs, and even boards of some of these large companies out there.
Absolutely. So part of the challenge here, and we've introduced this concept a couple of times, but some people want to build something. They want to say, I have something that you need and you can't get anywhere else. The challenge is if you start fencing it off that, which is what you want to do, or are you locking them out? And again, if there's uncertainty here, if there's a lot of companies playing in different ways, a lot of opportunities, you don't want to have that lock-in concept. And sometimes customers will just stay away from you and say, hey, I'm going to be purely open source because I don't have confidence you're going to play nicely with others. And to me, this is one of the fundamental questions going on in the space right now is, will we have tightly vertically integrated solutions where all of this disappears and there isn't choice? Or will we have the opportunity to mix and match freely and pick the components that work best for you and your needs? Sometimes they'll be highly specialized, sometimes they'll be generic and common. But I think the tendency towards lock-in by vendors here, while natural, is something many of them need to think about. And we have had vendors, by the way, go the other way, and I'll call it astroturf, rather than having a community that grew from the grass up to build here. They're saying, hey, I have a product that's been locked in, commercially developed, tight license. Now I'm going to open it up to open source. And they're trying to spontaneously have a community emerge around it. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. But there's a clear difference between people who have been deliberately open source from the beginning and those that have said, gosh, this isn't working, let me open source it and see if I get more going. And I think being deliberate about that is really important for these vendors. So we go to the next slide. Again, a lot of what we're talking about here is diversity or complexity. If you have too much diversity at the core of this technology, that's going to make it tough for the developers. And again, the developers are where things get interesting. Are you helping them build an environment and an application that's going to work for them smoothly? Or are they going to have to lock things down? Hey, if I don't have enough trust that this is going to work the same in one Hadoop distribution versus another, I'm going to have to restrict my customer's choice and say this only works with this platform. Alternately, the other choice is to say, I'm going to try and test and develop on 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or who knows how many different platforms, which is going to make things harder. So you either are restricting choice or creating a lot more work for yourself. And that's really the challenge here. And when we talk about, has Hadoop come a long way in 10 years or is it just starting? I think some of this friction here, the costs and delay to test in an environment that's a little too free for them, has been a challenge. But of course, you don't want to lose that option. But the question is, does the differentiated value come from the core or does it come above that? And I think the answer is higher level differentiation is where people should really be focused. And again, it's not just choosing a platform, it's choosing where to run that platform and where do you want to run your applications here. And you can see the default thought about Hadoop is that it's going to be dedicated on-premise, and that's the biggest category here. I'm going to take commodity servers and put them in my data center and run it on that environment. But then we see people also saying, no, I want to do shared infrastructure. I maybe want a virtualization layer here or have a shared storage array on the back end. We see in the green here, people suggesting they want to go with the appliances model. Maybe that's how they've always done data warehouse. If you can build a Hadoop appliance that is supported in the same way, deployed in the same way, solve some of that infrastructure challenge, maybe that's better. And then cloud and hybrid cloud here in the orange and the blue. Obviously, we talked about cloud growing here. It still looks relatively small piece of the Hadoop world, but going forward, we see more than 40% of people saying they want their big data platforms to be cloud-oriented and are heavily considering that. So the challenge here is things might be built for one environment but need to be able to run in any of them. And again, this is, does the differentiation come from having the best possible platform or does it come from having the best possible application running on any platform? And I think this is, again, a point of flexibility very important to the industry and for people building apps in the environment.
Yeah, and if you're on the broadcast here, I'd love to hear how you're thinking about deployment. Cloud's a big trend, but there's also rumblings. Hey, does cloud have the beef? Does it have the oomph in order to really support a heavy Hadoop load? So love to hear how you're trying this out. Tweet at us at odpi.org and let us know.
Or cost. Cost for cloud can be off-putting when you start talking very large amounts of data.
I would agree. Love to hear, and I've heard that a couple folks that I've talked to, when they're doing that, that's the first thing. Control's one, but cost is a big, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that. So kind of digging into maybe a little break in the action here and talking a bit about ODPi, and Nik has set it up really well, but where do we come into this picture? And and for us, there's really three big constituents that we try to target. One is on the Hadoop platform vendor side, and really making it have a consistent platform. Setting this floor of expectation. When you hear Hadoop, when you say I'm integrating with Hadoop, if I see that ODPi label on it, I know I can expect certain things to always be true. Doesn't stop innovation. It doesn't stop vendors from adding more features, integrating new projects, doing unique value-added things. But it sets that level playing field, that base level that everyone can expect is true. And as I'm an app developer, I'm an ISV system integrator. That's lowering my costs. Now I'm getting to the point where, hey, I write to ODPi. I test once an ODPi compliant Hadoop platform. It runs in any of them. And we'll touch on what a few of those look like here in a bit here, but that's lowering your costs, and that's making use of your spending less time on integration, less time making these one-off spoke relationships, and more time actually building innovative value. And if I'm an end user, these costs are coming to me, but also now I'm playing in a larger ecosystem here. I can pull together, these vendors from a Hadoop platform standpoint that say I'm ODPi compatible and compliant, and from the apps that I run, like a SaaS or tools from IBM or others that are ODPi compatible, and I can put these things together, right? And then I can mix and match pieces. I can change my Hadoop platform easily and know that if the apps that I chose were ODPi compliant, they'll work. Huge value there. And as we dig sort of further into this here, on the next slide, we have a large group of members that are focusing on this problem today. And there's, ones from the Hadoop platform vendor space to ISVs to systems integrators to startups to end customers. They all sort of see this. And from we as an organization, we're vendor neutral. Our product to the world here is how can we make Hadoop easier to adopt, simpler, and whatnot throughout there. And each member that comes to us is an equal participant. So let's look at sort of, I mentioned product. Let's look at what some of that product looks like and what it brings here. If you look at the world before ODPi, every ISV is doing a one-point integration. And I've been in the alliances world for a while. And the one thing that I've learned here is the hardest part of doing a technology alliance with another vendor is getting that technology in place. ODPi lowers that barrier. So now, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm a company, I'm an app vendor, and I can really only play with the 2 or 3 biggest Hadoop vendors here, and I just had to do my best with that. Now I'm able to open up my market here. I'm able to play with some of the niche players and maybe unlock a really great business opportunity, a really great market that my product can be relevant in. Go into Asia Pacific where there is certainly more regional-based Hadoop distros, or Europe. Those are great opportunities for you to extend your product reach there and potentially open up new markets and drive revenue. And that's what ODPi helps do. Altascale, Arena Data, Asia Info, IBM, Infosys, Hortonworks, all of those, by complying with the ODPi standards and the specifications, you are able to work easily with distribution Hadoop platforms released by those vendors and open up huge markets that you may not have even thought were out there. One compliance does it all. So moving forward here, yes, the specifications we have out here, and these here are coming out in a couple weeks. We have our first runtime spec that went out earlier this year. Right now here, runtime spec 2.0, and this is an area here where we're pushing out to include Hive and alternative file systems such as HDFS, starting to branch out and help solve tactical problems that vendors are having as they're working with these Hadoop platforms, and then looking at other areas within the runtime area. But then the other, which is really interesting, is the operation side. And if you're an app vendor, how how to manage, configure, and deploy your application on a Hadoop cluster. That's a one-off point solution for every vendor you work with. If you can consolidate that, that helps make your life a lot easier. And that's the goal of the operations spec, is to start setting those best practices and standards in place. This is all coming here in a couple weeks, later this month. And what's really interesting now is this has opened up this ecosystem we talked about. ODPi runtime compliance means that any of these Hadoop distros all have a same base of expectations across them, right? So as I look to integrate across the core Hadoop and soon to come the Hive components, it's the same. It's similar across there. I know that the certain things are always true. I know jars in their place, the configuration's similar. All these things that our specification outlines, it's all the same across there. And that gives you, as an end customer, tons of choice. I can switch between. I might say, hey, IBM's my main vendor, but maybe I have an office in China and they want to use something local there. Asia Info all of a sudden has a distro you can use, and all of your apps could translate over. Really, really, really powerful stuff. And the complement to this is the ODPi interoperable program. And with this here, we launched 11 big data applications from vendors like SAS and IBM and a number of others, which help finish this off. These are apps that already are interoperable across all of those distros. So you automatically know that if I get an app from SAS that has the ODPi seal of approval, if I get an application from IBM, like Big SQL, for example, that has that ODPi seal of approval on it, I know it'll work across. I know it's interoperable across all of those different distros. This is getting you out of, so the earlier comment I made here was, as a CIO or IT leader, one of the first decisions you're making is, what vendor do I work with? This here takes the risk out of that. This here says, hey, if I pick something in the ODPi area, I know I have an opportunity later to say, you know what, I can change that platform, and I know of everything that if I've picked was within ODPi, I'm okay. I can make that switch over, and it's not costly. So my hand's not shaking quite as much as I'm signing that 7-8 figure dollar check. I think that's a really powerful thing, and I'd be curious, Nik, and your thoughts there. Helping make that first decision less stressful. I imagine any CIO would like that.
Yeah, I think we've talked before about choice. We've talked about complexity. I mean, to me, confidence is one of the keywords, and the other keyword here really is quality, that the environment is going to be robust, that it's going to be able to perform the same way, act the same way, run the same way, and that's really what this is giving you. And having that, I really think is essential for people to move forward. I mean, there's nothing to say you can't go fully proprietary and pick one vendor and have them do everything for you. But I think given that this space continues to change so rapidly, knowing you've picked a suite of vendors and that hopefully that group continues to grow rapidly, that's going to make it just easier for you to know you've got the right direction.
Exactly. And I know, Nik, you have some anecdotes from your white paper you wanted to share here as well. From folks.
I wanted to stress here that this isn't just my opinion, although I clearly have opinions. I've spent the last 3 years really focused on this space. But for purposes of this, I went and interviewed a number of ODPi member companies, and I wanted to understand from their point of view, why were they participating, what were they getting out of it. And the first one I wanted to pull up here is Capgemini, a well-known professional services organization, being able to do a lot for the environment. And the topic we really drilled down on is the value in Hadoop itself, or is it in the applications built on Hadoop? You can see from the quote here, which I'll read you, there's a strong opinion there as well. This stuff is irrelevant. Not that it's not important, but it's dial tone. We want to move the battleground out of Hadoop, not worry about version 2.5 something of whatever. We should be talking about everything that goes on top instead. So it's critical to have the right foundation for Hadoop, but he doesn't think that the foundation is going to make or break whether or not the application is successful. He thinks it's just an important piece to be able to build on top of, and you want to not be too caught up in what version of Hadoop, but hopefully work with all versions of Hadoop. And that's really an important part for them in terms of creating value for their customers and being able to help people build big data applications, analytics applications, IoT applications, doing things like data warehouse offload, all the types of practices and services that Capgemini is building into a business around this. And earlier I poked a little fun at some of the consulting organizations, but I think they're one that has really started to embrace this and see the value and help build the value. But they don't think it comes from having a better HDFS. They think it comes from having a more stable common platform and then building above that.
And I want to dial in. I love the not worry about version 2.5 something. I'd add in there not worry about version 2.5 something vendor. That is one thing we keep seeing is as these Hadoop components are sucked in by a Hadoop platform vendor, all of a sudden there's just subtle things that change. And that's one of the biggest. We have a member Splunk, for example, that has told me that that's one of the biggest challenges they have. They integrate against the most stable components inside of Hadoop in that core Hadoop section, and even then, as they switch between vendor to vendor, Hadoop platform vendor to Hadoop platform vendor, same version, same shipping parts of Hadoop, different outcomes and different things that they have to address specifically on that platform. That it really shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and I think our next examples will illustrate that further. So talking about being able to build a product that to market, you want to get value out of it for the well-known organization, in use by pretty much the enterprise everywhere there today. But for them, being able to build applications, their customers build applications on top of Hadoop and VMware environments. I mean, the comment here tells it all. The fewer test suites, the better. If customers are new to Hadoop and need guidance, having ODPi as a standard and a framework is good. And I mean, good is important. Otherwise, you end up reworking things many times. And that's back to that tough choice. You can either limit customers and say you can only run on this version, or an organization like VMware would have to test with every possible combination. As we know, our N by N matrix of possible combinations of projects within Hadoop and vendors within Hadoop becomes overwhelming very rapidly. And one more example of that, Lenaro is helping the ARM community build better processors for mobile devices, IoT environments, and they're talking about supportability here. So not just building applications, but running applications. And the key here is, and so the quote says, we
Yeah, definitely here. As I sort of look at this quote, I love the slow, smooth is fast. Like that sticks out to me as it's insightful, right? It's an organization that is realizing, hey, you want people to adopt this stuff. You want people trying and testing this out. How do I make it simpler? How do I make it easier? How do I how do I get towards that barrier? And constant innovation is great, but if you can't simplify, the path of how these things get out and have, reasonable, not necessarily reasonable controls, but just a reasonable path to do so, it's challenging. And I think that's something, Apache Software Foundation does an amazing job of being a home to these projects and providing them the legal governance and whatnot to exist, along with the developer governance and pieces like that. This is a role that ODPi can help then step on top of this, is say, hey, as these pieces are getting consumed downstream, can we make it easier? Can we smooth out that path? And I think we're going to start seeing some of the benefits of that very quickly.
So John, sorry about that. I think my network dropped for a moment there talking about quality, but I'm back on the line now.
Okay, good. No problem whatsoever there. Happy to pinch it. So I guess looking at, what's our plans around ODPi from a release standpoint. Like I said, we did our first release here, and the timing is a bit off on here. We did our first release, and upcoming here is going to be our 2.0 spec release. We talked about that earlier here, so look for that here in the coming weeks. So as we look ahead, sort of the next slide here, how can you get involved? And there's a number of really good ways. I mean, obviously, there's opportunities for corporate membership, and you can check that odpi.org/members. But I'd also encourage you, if you're an app developer, especially, go check out the ODPi spec. Just take a look through it and see, because a lot of how we're designing this is in a very pragmatic way. It's different than a lot of standards approaches. We are trying to really hit tactical issues home. And we want to know if our specs are doing that. And if it's not, help us get there. Help us provide that feedback. Say, hey, you know what? If you guys could help solve problem X, boy, that would make our life easier. That's what we're here to do. So get involved, github.com/ODPi/specs. You can read the runtime spec, the operation spec, the ones that are just about ready to get released here. And then if you're an end user, so if you're a user of this technology, I mentioned this earlier, but we have a user advisory board, and what we're really trying to do there is, how do we help understand sort of what the thematic of organizations as they're thinking about this technology is, and potentially how ODPi can solve a lot of those issues. And it's a nice forum. It's outside of the construct of vendors. We throw all the vendors out of the room here. But we really try to get to the heart of the issues. How are you thinking about this technology? What are the challenges within your organization? What are the opportunities? That's what this group is here to form. If you're interested in that, you can go to our website as well here, and you can learn a little bit more information if you go under ODPi and look at end users, or contact us directly and get involved. It's a really, really, really nice opportunity. And then with that, I want to thank everyone, and Nick especially. Thank you. I think this has been a really, really good session here. I've definitely learned a lot from the research that you've pulled together here.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity. I think it's been really interesting to learn more about the organization, and it's been kind of eye-opening for me. I hope people take the time to check it out. I think it'll help the Hadoop ecosystem grow and continue to be relevant in the future and more valuable.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you everybody who joined us for the chat here. If you're more interested in ODPi, head to odpi.org. You can get our white paper that Nick authored here. We did it with ESG. Download that. You can learn, some of the tidbits here and more. There was some really, really great insight. So I want to thank you, and have a great rest of your day.